Again, I'd like to thank you for joining us to learn about new ILEARN blueprints and specifications. As I said before, my name is Tim Martin. I'm the Assessment Specialist for Science and Social Studies, and Kelly Connolly is the Program Lead for ILEARN. She'll be manning the chat box and hopefully be able to straighten out any technical issues as they occur. We also encourage you to follow our hashtag on Twitter to get the latest on changes and updates to ILEARN as they occur. During the session, we will briefly cover how ILEARN was developed, look in detail at the test blueprints, and discuss specifications and how they can be used in the classroom. We ask that you type any questions you have into the chat box at any time throughout this presentation. Kelly may be able to answer some of them immediately via chat. As time allows, we will stop at places during the presentation to answer questions about each section. There will be some time at the end to answer any remaining questions. We will not go into great detail in this section to save time for the content-specific portion of the presentation. To find out more about how ILEARN was developed, we encourage you to view Dr. Charity Flores' overview found on the ILEARN resource page at the IDE website starting July 1st. The original committee studying the transition from iStep Plus to ILEARN suggested some guiding principles which have been adopted. First and foremost was to focus on being student-centered. Building accessibility into every item from the beginning became a founding goal. This ensures an equitable approach to all Indiana students. We are also striving to be as transparent as possible in the design and development of ILEARN to all stakeholders. Without input from Indiana educators representing all parts of the state and all student populations, an accurate, precise assessment cannot be constructed. This is your test, and you can contribute to its development and implementation. We need the participation and feedback of all Indiana educators. Educators are involved in the formulation of new assessment from the ground up. The Indiana Academic Standards, or IAS, were developed with educators in 2014 and 2016 and are not changing for ILEARN. Blueprints and specifications were formalized by educator committees in February and March 2018. The item acceptance review with educators was completed in April to confirm the alignment of items from license banks to the IAS. Any new development needed will occur now through June and be reviewed by educators this summer. Once items are delivered, educators will review statistical flags to inform which items should continue to be used operationally. A new process for educators is in the scoring of student responses. We hope to recruit 3 to 4 educators from each corporation to assist in the scoring process in 2019 and beyond. In the summer of 2019, educators will determine the proficiency levels for ILEARN based on the content presented to students and the associated items. Again, educators are critical to the success of the new assessment program. The department will involve educators in the hand scoring of open-ended items to the extent possible. All interested educators will receive training and score items remotely and must commit to score full-time for the duration of the 3-week scoring window. Compensation will be based on the state government rate and include professional growth points for all educators. Look for more information in the coming months. These are some of the improvements we are making on the ILEARN assessment. Some of them are mandated by federal or state legislation. Others are current best practices in assessment and education. Briefly, highlights include changing from a fixed form to a computer adaptive model, or CAT, where possible, additional embedded online supports for all populations of students, a shorter overall assessment, including only one testing window, and a quicker turnaround time for school reports, 12 days starting in 2020. These improvements are covered in more detail in other ILEARN training presentations. All PowerPoint slides will be posted in the ILEARN resource page, including video links, when the webinars are concluded. Blueprints are the foundational document for creating an assessment. They are carefully crafted with educator input and, once finalized and approved, do not change for the life of the assessment unless the underlying standards change. Whenever you start to build something, you want to have a strong plan before you begin. When building a house, you don't just grab some wood and nails and get started. First, you think about what you want the end product to look like, then create a plan for how you will get there. Test construction is much the same. Before we start building the test, we think about what knowledge and skills we need to measure and how we can best measure those skills and provide data to parents, teachers, and administrators. The product of this plan is a test blueprint. Indiana educators from each content area and grade band met to craft the ILEARN blueprint. These blueprints are found on the IDE website. This is a portion of the current blueprint for the ILEARN Social Studies Grade 5 assessment. Please be aware that these blueprints are still drafts and may undergo minor changes over the summer. Final blueprints will be published October 1st. Reporting category, a group of standards that lend themselves to a higher level of knowledge or ability. Educators formulated these groupings after 3 days of discussions in February 2018. Standard, the IAS code for the individual standards in the reporting category. Full language of the standard will be on the item specifications. Item range. For each standard, educators determined its relative importance within the reporting category and against all other standards. This was translated into a range of the number of items for each standard on the assessment in a given year based on the relative weight of the reporting category and the total number of items on the assessment. For example, IAS 5.2.2 could have one or two items associated with it in a given year. The total number of items from this particular reporting category will be between 15 and 17. The sum of the individual minimums should be less than the reporting category minimum, and the individual maximums should total greater than the category maximum. This gives test developers flexibility in building the fixed form assessment year to year. I'm going to break script for just a moment here because I know we've had questions in the past about how this compares to the old check plus guidance that was posted on our website. If you look down the column of the minimum number of items that could be on the assessment in a year associated with a standard, you'll see that some are zeros and some are ones. The zeros may or may not appear on the assessment in a given year, but a minimum item of 1 will definitely appear on the assessment that year. Percent range is the weight of the individual standard on the assessment as a whole. Again, using IAS 5.2.2, it will comprise between 2 and 5% of the ILEARN Social Studies Grade 5 in any given year. The reporting category as a whole will be 38 to 43% of the assessment. The blueprint not only informs test developers how to build a test, it can help educators better target instruction to those standards and skills that have been ranked of higher importance by Indiana educators. All standards are required to be assessed and may appear on the assessment in any or all years. However, blueprints help inform curriculum mapping and unit development to ensure those higher ranked standards are adequately covered. After much careful thought and discussion, Indiana educators decided to combine 2 existing categories into one. The fewer number of reporting categories allows for a fewer number of items overall. This was in response to the mandate of the state legislature to shorten the statewide assessment if possible. This table is merely informational. There is such a large gap between grade 5 and high school assessments that one cannot inform the other. Educators did not strongly collaborate when deciding on these categories. In fact, the high school categories were mainly derived from legislative language that created the brand new U.S. government ECA. Content specifications serve as bridge documents between the IAS and ILEARN to help item writers and educators apply the focal elements of the IAS to items. As part of our core goals of better support and transparency surrounding ILEARN, IUE is releasing item specifications. This is the first time documents of this sort have been made public and are a rich resource for educators in preparing students throughout the school year. Each item needs to be specifically crafted to meet the needs of the assessment and measure as precisely as possible the desired outcome. Indiana educators determine the evidence statements for each standard, appropriate content limits, stimulus parameters, appropriate item types such as multiple choice, multiple select, or technology enhanced, and the construct relevant vocabulary. A sample item is included for each standard to help item writers and educators visualize the types of questions that could be present on the assessment. Accessibility is one of the key components of ILEARN and is built into each item from the very beginning of item development. IDOE has adopted accessibility as one of its core pillars supporting ILEARN. This means that every part of the test, from blueprints to scoring, is built with the purpose of reaching the greatest number of Indiana students. We'll be highlighting some of ILEARN's accessibility features later in this presentation. This is an example of a specification for ILEARN Social Studies Grade 5. Each standard has its own specification headed by the IAS standard code and language of the standard. Content limits, relevant vocabulary, and depth of knowledge were defined by educators to limit the scope of items and provide guidance for classroom lessons and assessments. A list of potential item types that could be written for that standard was chosen by those same educators. Note that the sample item is not the only item type that could be written. It is simply an example of the type and form of one potential item. Stimuli requirements and limitations shape the framework of the construct and provide guidance as to what information students are given and how that information will be presented to them. Evidence statements were crafted by Indiana educators to define what students must do to have mastered that standard. The specification provides a sample item that incorporates the various elements. This is not secure and is available to use directly or modify as needed for the classroom. Keep in mind that this is not the only possible way content can be presented. Check the item types allowed for other interactions students may encounter. Accessibility considerations are included for each standard. This is a change from prior practice when accommodations were added after the item was written and approved by educators. Now, they guide item writers from the beginning in developing items that are inherently accessible or that can be minimally altered, for example, Braille or text-to-speech, so the item remains valid for those students. Item writers are required to keep these in mind as they begin to develop items so that the largest number of Indiana students can fairly access ILEARN. Educators can also use these guidelines in their classrooms as they create lessons and assessments. Many of these are not specifically accommodations for special populations, but are general accessibility considerations for the entire student population. As bridge documents, specifications help item writers and educators understand exactly how each standard should be presented on the assessment. Content limits and relevant vocabulary help educators better tailor their presentations of content to students and formulate questions for classroom assessments. IDOE recognized that the validity of assessment results depends on every student having appropriate tools when needed based on the construct being measured by the assessment. Although many of these tools existed prior to ILEARN, it was important to establish a clear framework to understand which tools are offered and how those tools should be available to all students. 3 separate categories were created. Universal features are tools and resources available to all students taking the assessment. The same tools and resources should be available to students throughout the school year as they are learning content and taking assessments in the classroom. Designated features are tools and resources available to students identified as needing special features or helps to access content. This does not require an IEP, 504, or ILP, and these are not considered accommodations. If a student receives a designated feature on ILEARN, it should also be available to them throughout the school year. Accommodations are defined as a change in the standardized materials or processes of an assessment as documented in an IEP, ILP, or 504. They allow the student to validly participate in the assessment. One of the major shifts moving from ISTEP Plus to ILEARN is the focus on accessibility for all populations. Starting with the blueprint meetings, where educators drafted evidence statements and discussed reporting categories, the focus has been how to allow the maximum number of students access to each item. The ILEARN will allow all students access to many accessibility features not available on ISTEP Plus. Through a combination of universal design principles and computer-embedded accessibility features, Indiana has designed an inclusive assessment system by considering accessibility for all students from the initial design. These accessibility features should minimize the need for accommodations during testing and ensure the inclusive, accessible, and fair testing of the diverse students being assessed. The different aspects of the accessibility framework have been separated into different nested levels in order to assist in understanding the differences of which students are able to access or use each of the features. This infographic identifies how each of these levels interrelate. Universal features, designated features, and accommodations are grouped into two broader categories based upon how they are provided to the student. Embedded are available through the online computer platform, and non-embedded are provided to the student by the school. Okay, we want to kind of show you some of the resources that are currently available, and I will take you to that web page and show you where the blueprints and specifications are. We have a released item repository, which currently contains 10 items in every grade and content area, and will grow by 10 items per grade per content area every year. Of course, our blueprints and specifications are on that page. We have updated policies, technology, guidance, and a few other things. And keep watching that page throughout the summer, and then especially October 1st, as we develop more support materials, they will be added to that page. Here also is the URL for that page. I will go back to a screen with my contact information in that URL again. So if you don't quite get it right now, don't worry, it will come back up. So if you click on that link, you will land on a page that looks like this. This is our ILEARN for Educators page. Currently, we have three major areas on that page. We have test design, which contains the blueprints, the specifications, and the standards. We have our sample items and scoring page. So this is where you'll find those released items, any rubrics, and things like that. And then we have our policy section, which has, for example, the updated calculator policy and some of the technology specifications and things like that. For this presentation, I'm focusing on test design, so we'll go ahead and click on that. Here we've got front matter explaining what this page is, what blueprints are, and then here is our blueprint database, you might say. It's broken down, as you can see, by subject and by grade. Since we're in social studies, I will go ahead and click on that. And here is the blueprint. It is a PDF. You can download or print it as needed or wanted. The front matter kind of explains a little background of the blueprints, also a description in more detail of each of the categories. And then as you scroll down, you will see the actual blueprints. You can see that they're divided by reporting category with each of the standards. Okay, back out on that test design page, if you keep scrolling down, you will see information about specifications. We also have some documents about how to use those if you want to get more training on how to use those maybe in the classroom. In this section here, this table, some of you may be doing ELA and math as well. We have licensed items from different banks. So this table talks about specifications for those banks, but for social studies, we're just using the Indiana standards. So here is the database for our specifications. You just pick the subject area and the grade, and then you will see the reporting categories. As you click on the reporting categories, you will see that list there. Because the standards are no longer grouped by standard grouping, you may want to find a specific standard. If you click through these reporting categories, you see how it changes. It's real easy to scan down and find the particular standard that you need, and these are still in numeric order. If you'd like to view a specification, you click on the View button. You can see the specification. Here's the standard and the language, the content limits, what we can and cannot assess, vocabulary, which would be very useful, item types, and here's our evidence statements and the sample item, and then also the accessibility. There is the URL that splash page for you to go to find the release items, all the test design, and the policy information. Feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions as you start looking at these resources and unpacking. And again, I'm both science and social studies, so if you also teach science, you can contact me. And if you feel that it would be useful for a member of the assessment team to come down to your school or corporation and maybe give a presentation in more detail, also please contact us, and we're happy to work with you to develop a professional development. Thanks.